You weren't looking for a sign. You were just trying to get through the day. Maybe it was the morning after the funeral when the house was quiet in a way it had never been quiet before, and you didn't know what to do with your hands. Maybe it was weeks later on an ordinary Tuesday when the grief caught you off guard again the way it always does, when you think you've steadied yourself. And then the cardinal appeared bright red closer than it needed to be, perched somewhere. It had no particular reason to be on the porch railing at the window on the branch directly outside the room where you were sitting alone. It stayed longer than birds stay long enough that you noticed long enough that something in you shifted. You didn't say it out loud maybe, but you thought it, you felt it. The question that has been asked by more people than you will ever know in more languages and more cultures and across more centuries than any of us can fully comprehend is that you. This video is for everyone who ever asked that question and for everyone who felt foolish for asking it. You are not foolish, and you are not alone. Welcome back to Backyard Bird Mind. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe because what you're about to hear will change the way you look at every cardinal that comes to your yard. Today we're going into the cardinal, the bird, that more Americans associate with the presence of someone they've lost than any other creature in the natural world. We're going to look at where this belief comes from, how deep it goes, why it exists across so many different cultures and traditions, and what science actually tells us about why cardinals behave the way they do in the moments that matter most. Stay until the end because the last thing I want to share with you is something that people tell me again and again they needed to hear. The belief that has never gone away. Before we talk about cardinals specifically, we need to understand something about this belief in general because I didn't begin with social media, and it did not begin with greeting cards, and it did not begin with anything modern at all. The belief that birds carry the souls or messages of the dead is one of the oldest and most universally held spiritual convictions in human history. It appears in ancient Egyptian religion, where the soul, was depicted as a human-headed bird that could travel freely between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It appears in Celtic traditions, where certain birds were understood as messengers from the other world. It appears in Norse mythology and indigenous American traditions spanning the entire continent, in Japanese Shinto belief, in the folk traditions of virtually every culture that has ever had close relationship with the natural world, which is all of them. The specific association of the cardinal with deceased loved ones is rooted most deeply in folk traditions of the American South and Midwest regions, where the northern cardinal is a round resident present in every season, impossible to miss with its extraordinary red plumage. In these traditions passed down through families across generations, a cardinal appearing after a death is understood not as coincidence but as visitation. The phrase most commonly associated with this belief, cardinals appear when angels are near, has no single traceable origin. It exists as a piece of cultural knowledge that was simply always there, carried by grandmothers and great-grandmothers, written on memorial cards and embroidered on pillowcases, understood without needing to be explained. That kind of belief, the kind that doesn't need a source because it was never taught, only remembered, is worth taking seriously. Why the cardinal specifically? Of all the birds in the American backyard, why the cardinal? Not arbitrary. It is rooted in the bird's most fundamental physical and behavioral characteristics, qualities that when you understand them make the association feel less like superstition and more like observation. The male northern cardinal is unmistakable. In a world of brown and gray and olive and muted winter colors, the cardinal is red. Not pink, not orange, red, the deep saturated unambiguous red of a creature that seems to have been designed specifically to be seen. In snow it blazes. Against bare winter branches it blazes. In the gray light of a November morning when everything else has lost its color, it blazes. This visibility is not random. It is the result of millions of years of evolutionary pressure. The red plumage signals genetic fitness to potential mates and territorial rivals. But to a grieving human who has just lost someone they love, a flash of impossible red in a gray winter yard does something that no amount of evolutionary explanation can fully account for. Stops you, and it makes you present in a way that grief paradoxically often prevents. It stays. Cardinals are not the most skittish of backyard birds, but they are not bold either. A cardinal that perches close to a person, close enough to be seen clearly, close enough that the encounter feels deliberate, is a cardinal that has assessed that person as safe. That assessment takes time, it is not casual. When a cardinal appears close and stays, it is because something specific has brought it there. And whatever that something is, territorial behavior, feeder, proximity, simple chance, or something that science does not yet have adequate language for, the effect on the person who witnesses it is real. What happens in the body when you see a cardinal after loss? This is the part that most people don't expect, but it matters. Grief does something specific to the human nervous system. It keeps the body in a state of low-grade hyperarousal, a persistent, exhausting alertness that comes from the mind's inability to stop scanning for the person who is no longer there. Grief researchers describe this state as one of the most physically demanding experiences a human body can go through. It depletes, it tires, It makes the simplest tasks feel impossible, and then the cardinal appears. What happens next is documented. When the human brain encounters something unexpected, vivid, and emotionally significant, particularly in a state of grief, it produces a brief but powerful shift in neurological state. Scanning stops, the hyperarousal pauses. For a few seconds or a few minutes, the grieving person is simply present with a red bird on a branch. Researchers who study grief and meaning making have documented that these moments of unexpected beauty or connection during bereavement, what they call continuing bonds experiences, are not pathologic. They are not signs of denial or unhealthy attachment. They are in the current understanding of grief psychology normal, healthy, and often deeply important to the survivor's process of integration. The experience to matter. The experience of stopping, of being pulled out of grief and into the present moment by something vivid and alive and impossibly red is real, regardless of what caused it. But for many people, millions of people, the experience is also something more, something that defies the neurological explanation and points towards something else, something older, something that science does not yet have the instruments to measure. The stories that keep coming. I want to share some of what people have told me, not because these stories prove anything, but because the patterns in them are too consistent to ignore. A woman in Tennessee told me her father died in February. On the morning of his funeral, she was standing at the kitchen sink, not thinking of anything in particular, just trying to get through the next hour. A cardinal landed on the fence post directly outside the window, a fence post it had never used before in the 2 years she had lived in that house. It stayed for 11 months, in use. She counted. A man in Ohio told me his wife of 43 years died on a Wednesday in October. The following Sunday, their granddaughter's birthday, the family gathered in the backyard. A cardinal appeared on the arm of the garden chair that had always been his wife's chair. It stayed through most of the gathering. Nobody asked anyone else what they were thinking. Nobody needed to. A woman in Virginia told me she hadn't cried since her mother's death 3 weeks earlier. She had been moving through the days mechanically, efficiently, not feeling anything. She was taking out the trash when a cardinal landed on the trash can lid and looked directly at her. She cried for the first time. Rare stories. They are in the experience of everyone who works with grief, and everyone who tends a bird feeder, and everyone who has lost someone they loved. Extraordinarily common stories. The details change. The cardinal stays. What science says and what it doesn't. I want to be once with you about what we know and what we don't. What we know: cardinals are year-round residents across most of the eastern United States. They are present in every season, in every weather condition, in every kind of neighborhood. We'll suddenly begin noticing them after a loss, not begin noticing them after a loss, not because the cardinals have changed, but because grief has changed what the person is paying attention to. This is called the frequency illusion or the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, and it is a well-documented cognitive pattern. What we also know: cardinals are drawn to stillness. A grieving person sitting quietly, not moving quickly, not making sudden sounds, is exactly the kind of human presence that a cardinal will approach more closely than it would approach an active, noisy, unpredictable person. The stillness of grief paradoxically creates the conditions under which a close cardinal encounter is most likely to occur. What we don't know, whether that's the who, the explanation, whether the extraordinary consistency of these experiences, the timing, the duration, the specificity, the emotional precision, is fully accounted for by frequency illusion and stillness. Whether the part of the experience that cannot be explained by those mechanisms is simply unexplained, or whether it points to something that our current instruments cannot measure. Science is very good at measuring what exists within its current framework. It is, by definition, limited in its ability to measure what exists outside that framework. The people who have had these experiences are not, as a group, credulous or confused. They are grandmothers and teachers and veterans and doctors and people who have simply lost someone and found a red bird in an unexpected place at an unexpected moment. Their testimony deserves more than dismissal and less than certainty. What it deserves is the same thing the cardinal itself deserves: careful, honest, open attention. What to do when the Cardinal comes. If you have had this experience, if a cardinal has come to you in a moment of grief or remembrance or quiet aloneness, there is one thing I want you to know above all others. You don't have to decide what it means. You don't have to commit to a belief you're not sure of. You don't have to explain it to anyone. You don't have to defend it or justify it or resolve the tension between the neurological explanation and the feeling in your chest that the neurological explanation doesn't fully cover. You just have to be in for as long as the moment lasts. And when it's over, you can carry it with you in whatever way feels true. As a comfort, as a question you're still living with, as a certainty you've arrived at through your own experience and no one else's. The cardinal doesn't come with an answer attached. It comes with a presence. And sometimes, for a grieving person in a gray morning in a quiet house, presence is exactly what is needed. More than explanation, certainty. More than anything science or theology or any of the frameworks we use to make sense of the world can provide. Just read. just the sound of wings and then stillness. Just the feeling before your mind can intervene that you are not quite as alone as you thought you were. Have you had a moment like this, a cardinal that came when you needed it, or when you least expected it? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and these are the ones I carry the longest. I'll see you in the next